I mentioned earlier that a year after the legislation was passed to begin this campus, Britt was already beginning as an assistant professor at College Park. Well, it's very interesting. In 1963, a number of things happened, and I'm going to be talking throughout this year a lot about them because it is a very special time. Some of you may not know. First of all, how many people in the room had not been born by 1963? Let me see your hands. Wow. That's amazing. It really is. Cynthia Hill, put your hand down. Don't even go there. What is significant about that period is that most people don't realize that fewer than 10% of Americans had gone to college. Most people were not in college, had not thought about the possibility of going to college. And Maryland was a bit ahead of the country in some ways in starting another campus. When George Lanew's book comes out, I've been reading parts of it, there were a number of places in the country where people began to have other campuses because they wanted to give other people a chance to get a college education. Well, interestingly enough, it was in 1965 that the Higher Education Act was passed, and all of a sudden, more people began to go to college, more financial aid was available. But what's significant about our founding is that it was at a time when we became the first university in this state to admit students of all races. Every other institution had been founded either as a white institution or a black institution. We are that, and this is why sometimes we call ourselves an HDI, a historically diverse institution, the idea, not a bad term, right? And the fact is that we have been for almost 50 years now a kind of experiment, a very interesting experiment. Can you bring people together from all races, give them a chance to excel and learn how to work together as they prepare to live in the world? Well, interestingly enough, at that same point when the master plan was being developed, Harold Adams from RTKL architecture firm was invited to the White House because of a tragedy. President Kennedy had been assassinated, and the Kennedy family asked Mr. Adams to develop a symbol of the life of John Kennedy. It's such a touching story. And he developed what is known today as that eternal flame that's at the cemetery. And it was meant to be a symbol of hope. And this same brain, the same man who was developing that symbol of hope for the country was developing a master plan for this campus. And so those people who came during that period saw themselves as just that, a symbol of hope. Some came out of College Park, wonderful names like Alvin Kuhn and Homer Shamp, and others came, Dick Neville, and they had great experiences there. They came here to start this new university, and the idea was actually rooted in innovation. The idea is, how do you start a new university and do things differently, try different ideas when you're going to have a different kind of population? And interestingly enough, from the beginning, the notion of interdisciplinarity was very important. Some of you remember the name Slo Petrovich, our beloved Slo Petrovich, who would get up on the stage and start talking about students, and you'd finally have to make him sit down because he was so passionate about those students, right? And working with him was wonderful Pat Lanou, who I hope is here today because she's retiring, and I wanted to stand wherever she is. Is Pat Lanou here today? Give her a hand. There she is, yeah, give her a hand, who always, yes, who always reminds us of the importance of interdisciplinarity as a kind of symbol, as all of you are involved in connecting with disciplines and going across areas. And what was significant, though, was that we were able to bring together, Britt, wonderful PhDs from around the country, from the best universities, at a time when there was a surplus of PhDs. They didn't have necessarily jobs in established institutions. And people were excited about coming to a young university where they could help to build something. And so you had people from Berkeley and Harvard and Chicago and other places who came together. And the traditional idea is you have a lot of undergrads and a lot of grad students, and grad students teach a lot of courses to help you out. But we never got at that point the resources to have all of that. And so what happened was a lot of the research faculty was spending a lot of time with undergraduates. And this notion of research and undergraduates from the beginning, a kind of innovative approach that they did much more than wash test tubes. They were really involved in the research, and we got that reputation as a place building people, not just in science, though science was a very important part of it, but in the policy areas and in the social sciences. And when you read this history that George is writing, you'll see also that UMB was very interested in having a university here in this area that would produce students of the quality who could go to med school and law school and do well. And so what happened that's interesting is that we really got a reputation for producing doctors and scientists and of a certain type, primarily who were not of color. And at the same time, in the policy areas and law, we were producing blacks and whites and others, quite frankly. But the challenge that we faced, that in the area where most American universities were having a problem, producing minorities in science, we were not having success. The average black SAT in '87, that was a famous protest. For those of you who are here, a very famous protest, and it occurred, I came to this campus on April Fool's Day. That should have told me something. Because shortly after that, it was this big black student protest, and they took over the 10th floor. And they would not leave, right? And the TV cameras were constantly going. And the real problem was a lot of the students were not doing well academically. And we needed to figure out how to help these students. Everybody meant well, and it meant looking at the data. How far down could students be in academic preparation in order to succeed? How could we go about making sure that we were using innovative approaches that might help more kids to make it? We could not find one black on campus at that point, after 20 years of development, who had earned an A in an upper level science course. And when somebody found one, the person had come from another country, could not find one from this country who had made it. And the question was that the problem only? And what we saw was, quite frankly, a lot of students of all races were not making it. And for the alums in the room, you know, well, I meet two types of people who went to UMBC. Those who came in, did well in those first 20 years and are doing really well, and then a lot of students, black and white, who flunked out. But the notion in America for a long time was that flunking out just meant it was a really rigorous place. High standards, you get my point? And people meant well, it's just that people didn't have the background and we had not thought it through. And that's where that notion of Meyerhoff came in, and it was a part of an ongoing experiment. How do you help people from different races to succeed in different disciplines? And faculty came together with staff to focus on ways of making a difference. While people in the support areas, Cynthia Hill in student support, all these people working to try to figure out how do we make a difference with students who are not doing well, who are really upset and thinking that there's all kinds of issues involved. And the significance is this campus pulled together so effectively that we have become the leading institution. As of last year, we have now gone ahead of all the HBCUs in producing African Americans who go on to get PhDs in science and MD PhDs. Give yourselves a big hand for that. And at the same time, what it means is that everybody from the national agencies to the White House was looking to see what are we doing in terms of innovation to make the difference, to make this happen. Now, people say, oh, UMBC in science, but then we've always had this challenge that the media will talk more about us in STEM than in the other areas. And I remember, some of you remember the name Hugh Graham, who did the study in 1997 from Hopkins, and what the study showed was that UMBC was 13th among public universities in research scholarship in the arts, in the humanities and social sciences, which was surprising to a lot of people, making the point that there was strength across disciplines. And so what we've learned from thinking about research faculty and undergrads, and as we begin to build the graduate education, and Janet Rutledge will appreciate my saying this, some remember the name Scott Bass when he said, when we talked about admissions at first, we only talked about admissions, meaning undergrad admissions, that we had to distinguish between undergrad admissions and graduate admissions, and then give grad students their due and understand their issues as we build that graduate enrollment along with the research. And in all of these cases, we were talking about innovative approaches to building student success. And at the heart has been the idea of building community among the students. So from a Meyerhoff group to the Seawitt group to the McNair scholars to the Sondheim scholars to the Linehan scholars to the Drescher scholars, you know, you've got to the athletes and their groups of teams. If you notice, the athletes, believe it, that their retention rates, their graduation rates are much higher than the campus, because there's community among them. You've got staff and coaches working to give them support. That's why our floors, the living learning floors that we have, the first year seminars, now the Retrieval Learning Center, the new projects like iCubed and the Nexus project with HHMI and the new Gates grant are all designed to have community among those students. What we learned from the institutional research team and others was that people tend to do much better when they get affiliated with some group. When they're affiliated with some group, they begin to support each other. On other campuses, there's a group now called the Posse Group. You've heard of those in a lot of campuses now. Well, we've got our own kinds of posse groups on this campus that focus a lot on supporting each other, group work, collaboration, and then that interaction between faculty, staff, and students to give them that support. What does it mean? It means we've become a national model for innovation. And what I would say to you is this, that this new activity that the provost is leading, based on the Carnegie Grant and some other funds that we're raising, will allow us to take course redesign to the next level across disciplines. I mean, I am excited about the things that are happening in digital humanities and psychology and across areas. And faculty will be writing, are in the process right now, of writing these proposals so that we have a competition to fund efforts to redesign other courses across disciplines and eventually to move from the first year to the next year. And for me, what does innovation mean in higher education? It means being willing to look in the mirror and to ask, what is it we haven't even thought about? It means being willing to say, well, we may say we are involved in interdisciplinarity, but are we with the substance we need to have at every level? It means finding ways to be even better than we are. We have used the phrase for years now, success is never final. There's no doubt in my mind that as healthy as we are, we know we can be much better. We know we need support to help people in the different areas. Britt and I and others are working to build salaries as soon as we can. And at the same time, the real issue is how do we use the spirit of innovation to take us to the next level? That's going to be the point. You will hear me saying all year long as I close that this is my 20th year as president and my 25th year on this campus. It was in 1963. It was right now that I was beginning my 9th grade year in Birmingham. And I never imagined at that point that before this academic year was over, I would find myself in jail. It never occurred to me that I would hear a man called Dr. Martin King, that he would say to me that it's possible for you to go to a school where you don't have to have hand-me-down books. It's possible for you to go to school with the white kids who've always been seen as smarter than you are. It's possible that people might believe you could be a first-class American. And when I heard him say those things, I said to my parents, I've got to go with him. I've got to march. I've got to be involved. And so when I think about the breaking ground work of our students right now in engagement, I think about the fact that even young people, whether they are 12 or 20, can make a difference in what happens to all of us. And when people say to me, things are so bad, what are we going to do? I just think about that little fat kid who was a math nerd in 1963 and how far this country has allowed him to come. And I think about how amazing UMBC is as a place of hope, rooted in innovation, a place that will change the world. You are the best. Thank you all very much.